Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career, with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls and people. It's Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Philter. I'm joined by a special guest. Well, everyone's a special guest because they take time to join me on my podcast. I'm joined by Jazz Hill. Now, as you know, some people I know, some people I don't. Some people I meet for the first time on this podcast. And Jazz is one of those people that this is the first time that we're meeting, but it won't be the last time that we communicate and stay in touch with each other. But I looked at her history, and she has such a breadth of knowledge, of industry knowledge, of being in Hollywood or LA and working in modeling. So I was like, wow, this could be a great conversation, particularly for young people that are trying to break into the industry of modeling and promoting themselves. So I think this will be a great episode. So Jazz, can you give the listeners a little bit of a background on who you are before we, start this podcast?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for talking with me today and having me here to have this conversation with you. To start off, I'm from Calabasas, California. I'm 23 years old. I just graduated college this past December, actually, from Long Beach State University. My major was communications and public affairs. Currently, I'm trying to go after my master's. I'm in the process of applications right now, so fingers crossed to see where I end up. Hopefully it's a good school. But as far as the entertainment business, as far as modeling, I do print and commercials. That's where I get most of my bank, per se. And aside from the modeling, I am also involved in publicist work, as well as the publicist firm that I work with currently is also opening a production division, which I'm becoming very hands-on with as far as pitching and selling television shows, films, reading scripts, writing scripts, really moving into potentially this new producer role. And hopefully sometime in the next couple of years, I'll be able to sign a deal with a studio lot for this production company.
Wow, that's quite a lot of things going on.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So you grew up in California, and I guess was this like something you were already familiar with, this world of entertainment and modeling growing up? In high school, or family members, was this like something that you knew of, or you learned this later in life?
So this was something that was always around me already. Both of my parents are actually private fitness trainers. They have a gym in West Hollywood, but more specifically, their clientele, for me to watch them growing up, they worked with everyone in the entertainment business. I mean, actors, CEOs of, I'm talking Sony, Universal Studios. I was constantly around these people, and just for sure always in that atmosphere. And it was definitely something I was able to watch. On top of that, going to a high school like Calabasas High School, for example. And when you think Calabasas, a lot of people reference, oh, that's where the Kardashians lives, where Drake lives. Some people call it the home of the stars, yada, yada, yada. Also growing up in an atmosphere as that. And when you go to that school, there are other people in entertainment, whether it's sports, whether it's television, that, their kids went to school with me as well. And I literally grew up walking to school every day, walking through a parking lot of Mercedes-Benz, BMWs, G-Wagons driven by 16-year-olds. And that was something that was also a major part of my upbringing that was around me. Wasn't ever something I had personally. I didn't grow up with, money and stuff, but it was the uber wealth that I was constantly seeing and understanding where it was coming from. What was the majority of these people's careers that was able to put their children in this position to have these nice cars or to grow up in this affluent community. And so it's this community here in Los Angeles um is extremely entertainment business oriented, of course. um and Hollywood being here, based out of here as well, it's what I was constantly seeing all the time.
I find that so interesting, and then like particularly your upbringing in that high school environment of the uber rich, and my high school was very diverse, where it was very polarizing. Like we did have, where I live in Northern Virginia, we had the top 1% of wealth, but then we also had those that lived in subsidized housing in one school. So we had a very polarizing experience. Was yours very polarizing, or was mostly wealth?
It was mostly wealth, for sure. I mean, if anything, it was definitely flipped, where that 1% that was not extremely wealthy was actually the kids that were recruited for the sports teams, for our football team, for the volleyball team, the track team. That was our 1%. And that is also during the time that I went to Calabasas. That was definitely the time period where Calabasas was blowing up a little bit because all our sports teams were doing extremely well. Um, but again, that was literally because we were bringing in so many of these star athletes that were not from that community. Um, that that was the only flip side to that. So literally opposite of what you just said.
Oh, interesting. And so as you transfer, you came, as a little bit about your journey. You came to the East Coast for 1 year, and then we could just fast forward over that and go back when you returned home. When did you start thinking returning home to start working and start getting yourself out there in regards to your own career as a model?
So, when I first started off in college after I graduated, as I was saying before we actually started this episode, I used to play volleyball. It was a huge part of my life. I was playing for over 10 and a half years. I ended up making it to college, playing on the East Coast at Catholic University in the Big East Conference, very briefly before I decided to transfer back home for multiple reasons, issues with the university I was playing at. When I transferred back home, it was around 2019. It was right before the pandemic happened, right before, literally. I was in a weird place. I was in a really weird place and thinking, well, I'm not really sure if I want to continue this path of volleyball. Something kind of catapulted me, because the thing about a sport like volleyball is it's not like football or basketball where you can make this career out of it. There's a league for it and it pays the numbers that these other sports do. It's not really the same. And I didn't have as much of a push or a drive for it anymore as I did prior. The only goal with that sport for me was just to get me to college. And that's exactly what it did. But now that I realized, well, this isn't something that I necessarily need anymore. In fact, I'm very smart enough to put myself through school without the need of like, do I need to put my energy into something as this when I've always had these other interests that I really need to start practicing with repetition a little bit more now and taking more seriously? I think I'm going to go to option B. And yeah, 2019, I moved back home. I was in a position where I also had to figure myself out. I needed to figure out, like, this was a time when I didn't have a car. I was briefly back home. I had no money. And this was a very like low point for me. This was not something that I wanted to be in. This was like, I need to elevate myself to some degree in some way and get myself out of this very quickly. Because I am not this person to just sit around and just, you know, wait for something to happen or, whatever. It was a moment of push for me, and sort of just a F it moment of like, just do it. Just go after what is it that you always wanted to do in the first place. And plus growing up anyways, I was always involved in theater and choir because I also sang and dance. I was always taking those classes. I was um always had that on the side, aside from my constant training with this sport, being pushed by my father who also played basketball. Um so this transition immediately took off, and since that time, it was really the pandemic that really pushed it. For some reason, even though a lot of people weren't working, I was really working. Like, really, for some reason, this was my time to come up. And that was when I just immediately, everything started happening. I transferred into my amazing new 4 year. I got my apartment, I got my car. This modeling progression became full time. I ended up signing to my first agency, then my second agency. Then I started learning the game about how to be signing to agencies. Could I sign a multiple? How do I need to get myself more exposure for getting booked? I really started learning the game. Um, and it wasn't anybody teaching me that. That's something people got to understand, is I think they look to somebody really to teach them or tell them, when the best teacher is yourself. And it's you putting yourself in these circumstances, positions, whether it's like you putting yourself in the exposure of going to a set or putting yourself out there getting booked for a set. You are putting yourself there to learn, but only you can take in, whatever it is that you're going out there for. So yeah, it's been some major transition for me since that time period.
I'm very curious though. I mean, you're saying the experience is the greatest teacher. Putting yourself out there is a great teacher, but at the same time, obviously we don't always get there on our own. Whether we have a mentor or someone we looked up to kind of show us the path or read books.
Hmm.
So in that part, right, you're teaching yourself the game of modeling and putting yourself out there. I hear that you said you use experience to teach you this, but was there also any other concrete, tangible learning tools that you use, whether it was a person that guided, a mentor, or books or podcasts that you listen to, anything like that?
Honestly, and I'm gonna be real, everything you just said as far as these tools though, whether it was books, whether it was classes such as like acting classes I have been taking, um, these are still these are still tools that I had to put myself out there to find,
There, okay.
that I had to enroll myself in order to meet that teacher. And don't get me wrong, I have worked with teachers to help me in front of camera work, runway coaches,
Mhm.
even my agents, my management that I have now that also work in that field of really training their people who they have signed under them. These are still people that I had to give the okay to, of like, I'm going to work with you. I want to work with you because of A, B, and C, because this is my goal as to I need to get here. But it always and only comes down to solely yourself as far as, um, you know, meeting that person and taking that meeting. And like you said, reading that book, taking the class, whatever the case is, like, it still always came down to my research on it and finding these tools.
I love that. So finding, I love that research and doing it. And so it's basically you have to put yourself out there. Um, when you were in that funky space, like moving into the pandemic, did you like say, okay, enough is enough? I'm going to start hitting it. And like, did you map this out? Was this happenstance, or are you like, okay, I feel like I'm attractive. I feel like I'm tall. I feel like I can sing. I can dance. I'm going to be a model and actress. Did you like a light bulb go off, or you just kind of started adding these things together? Like I might.
Everything really started everything the last couple of years has been coming together very slowly. I started off with the modeling only because I needed it to help me get comfortable in front of a camera.
Okay.
It was training to get me in the transitioning of learning and working towards acting. Then, as far as, now currently working through and training for like auditions for acting that I get now, then I start thinking bigger scope. Well, if this is what I can do in front of the camera, what is it I can create behind the camera? And that's when I started getting in the mindset of, well, what could I be as a producer? That's where I'm thinking with this company I'm working with now, that's opening up a production division, really getting my hands on reading scripts and thinking about writing scripts and thinking, well, what if I could create a project or write a project that I could pitch, that I could put myself in? And you think and you see all of these very successful actresses now. Actually, if you read into them, Margot Robbie, Gal Gadot, a lot of these actresses, they have their own production companies. Reese Witherspoon, they have all these production companies, and it's solely because, I mean, not only is it making them more money, but these women are writing themselves into roles, because that's that, not just the drive that they have, but they're thinking smart creatively as far as like how else can they get themselves a job to be put on a screen. It's not always going to be a studio or whatever the case is that's going to pick you for every role. Sometimes you literally have to make your own role, which has made me already think and transition into, okay, I should start working on this as well. Because if I were to write a project and I sell it successfully, oh, like then that's all mine. I know what I'm doing, so.
So I'm very curious. I mean, I think that's great because you're taking the agency in your own hands, right? And you're taking the power and saying, like, I'm not going to wait for other people to create opportunities. If I become a producer, I create my own opportunities. And I said, but also what I'm hearing concurrently is that you might be going back to school yourself to get a master's. So in that thought process of that trajectory, that what you want to do for your career, discuss with us a little bit about your thoughts about, like, this is going to take a lot of work, but also currently you're going to be also doing something else to take a lot of work. Do you think they're in conflict, or they're going to work together, going to school and this pursuit of entertainment concurrently?
Right. Well, so going after my master's, I keep getting told, you don't need to go after it right now. You have so much time. You can go back in a few years. I've had people tell me it's not really worth it. Not many people I know even need a master's anymore. Da, 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 da. For myself, I want this master's because I feel, as a woman, especially a woman of color in this generation, I find it's much harder to walk into rooms and be respected unless you have all your badges. And I feel that if I were to walk in and state and show and prove, like, listen, it doesn't hurt to have these degrees. It doesn't hurt to say, this is my knowledge. This is my understanding. I went to school for this point of not just to prove to other people, just exactly what I'm capable of. But, I want that accomplishment. And also, I don't find it as a struggle for me or juggling, as far as me wanting to do the masters and working on this production division and working on the modeling and working on the acting. Yeah, that sounds like a lot, but I'm good at juggling. Not all people are. I'm not to say that a lot of people are, but it's never something I've ever minded. And good practice for me was during getting my bachelor's. While I was in school completing my 4-year, the first half of college playing volleyball to transitioning into the modeling, and also, like any other work I was doing. I mean, I feel like I was already practicing that while completing my 4 year. I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference as far as getting my master's. I'm just leveling up. That's all I'm pushing myself to doing, is just leveling up.
I love that. So, you spoke about being a person of color. Um, and, let's discuss that. How has that been a part of your journey? How has that, created barriers or adversities that you had to overcome, particularly with the modeling and the goals of all of the like. So, can you talk about how that identity has, been a part of your journey so far?
I will say, the entertainment business can be messed up. It can be really messed up. The first manager I ever worked with, who I signed with, did not get me much work. I didn't really enjoy working with her. Some about her energy. I was like, this isn't gonna work for me. One of the first things she said to me, as far as my look and what I needed to do when I first came to her, I had really bad acne prone skin and I had dyed my hair blonde. She first told me she wasn't going to sign me until I would clean up my skin and dye my hair brown to look more like I was basically mixed, like to quote unquote not confuse middle America. That's what she said. Keep in mind, this manager is a white lady. I came back, I did everything she had asked, as far as like delivering this look she wanted, as far as sending me out for roles, for jobs. And I just remember her saying to me one day, before saying that she was going to work with me, she said, "Black girls are just in right now." And the way she said it, so settled to me, so like, just no shame in it. No, like, it's the truth. Not to say it wasn't, but the delivery from her, I thought, that's crazy. That's crazy. And to also think, in her head, the only reason she's taking me on as her client, as someone to
Yeah.
send out, is to help make her money. She's only seeing me as this product, rather a person. She's only seeing me as this individual who, oh, like she checks off the boxes for African American, mixed, ethnically ambiguous, whatever, for this role. And without really understanding, what type of family does she come from? What type of background does she come from? What is she about? What are her morals? Like, not really asking any of those questions, because she don't really care about that. She really caring about, okay, you fit the look, let's put you here. Which, a lot of representation is like that. That's how people even get signed to agencies and stuff in the first place. They're looking for a certain look, whether it's to check off, you know, how could you be in the category of our plus size division? How could you be in the category of our ethnic division? How could you be in the category of our LGBTQ division? Like, this industry is a lot surrounded by checking off boxes. Can you check off boxes, and which one? Or can you fill this slot on this roster? If you can, yeah, that, sure, now you're signed. Congratulations. But that's only if that slot opens up. So it's dealing with things like that have been crazy, especially getting booked on sets where, I'm not kidding, like, there have been countless sets. Almost every set I've been on has been an all-white crew. I think I've only ever worked on a commercial once with a guy. There was one man on set who was black, and he was a part of the lighting crew or something. But I think that was the only person I'd ever worked with, as far as what's going on behind the camera. But makeup artist, hairstylist, never worked with a black MUA hairstylist. But they're hiring people of color. They want people of color, of ethnic, looks on screen. But how it's handled off screen is like, you know, find somebody that's going to understand how to do my hair, you know, like to actually properly work with curly hair to make it not frizzy, but, you know, do something correct with it. So these things, these unacknowledged situations, scenarios in this business are real. They're totally ignored. They are totally swept under the rug and looked at as, oh, it's just whatever. But it's not. It's really not. It's really it does make you question these huge companies. Who are these people running them? Because I'll tell you something, it's not too many people of color. For sure not. It's for sure not.
I mean, it's very systemic, and you see me grimacing and just like, wow, it sounds very toxic, and like some like kind of like racial like PTSD. You know what I mean? Like like racial trauma, like those microaggressions, those words, like I can empathize with that where they say, "Oh, you're in right now." I'm like, "Well, they're not seeing me as a person," or
Right.
they saying things like, "You're smart for a black guy," things like people
Right.
say that.
Right.
These little words that like, what do you mean by that? Or like, uh, you know, I'm pretty sure that someone said, "Oh, you're beautiful for a black woman." Like, you're like,
Right.
what do you
Right.
mean by that?
Right.
And
Right.
it seems very hard, but I don't know. I don't even think I have a question. I was just like, when I was listening to your story, it sounded just like toxic, right?
Oh yeah. Oh
But
yeah.
shining a light, as you go through these efforts, which ways, do you want young people coming up after you, to hopefully, what do you see to make this industry better? Or, you said a few things, right? Like leadership roles of people of color with leadership roles. What would, make this, system better, for Black creators and models and actors and actresses and models and all those things?
So this idea of people now saying like there's no need for a degree, no need for going to school or getting into debt, I understand that. Um, but I disagree with the notion of being educated on these matters. I think everyone um, needs to be my generation specifically needs to be a lot more aware and alert of what's happening in the world right now. There are so many things. We're touching on a speck of a whole realm of issues that is happening currently. I mean, we're just talking about racial matters, haven't even begun to look into what's going on with the climate crisis, what's happening with elections next year. It's next year. It's coming back. I mean, like, it's there's so many there are really so many concerns that people just don't really they're just not aware of. They're just not aware of. And then, we pay more attention to I don't know if vulgarity is actually a word, but just more vulgar things that we see online, right? Or on social media. We pay more attention to that, and that's more trending because of how inappropriate it is, and it tears away and takes away from just these matters that we're talking about right now, as far as what we really should be focusing on and figuring out and understanding and paying attention to, um, because there will be no change unless somebody goes in and faces it and is like, oh, like I see this for what it is now. Somebody does need to take action in this. There's not enough there's just not enough awareness or education, I think, for my generation to understand um so many of these issues that are happening today in our generation, I think.
So one thing I was thinking about is that if you were to do your own movie, this is random, your own movie or own TV show, what would it be about?
I've written multiple storyline ideas already. I've written multiple. It's just a matter of the way I've written these stories already. And I know I'm already 23, only 23. It's not like I'm like in my 40s or 50s or something. But I learned that how I write is based on different times and points and experiences in my life, different periods. So if you're sitting here and you're asking me, like what's the one story? I don't think I could even give you just one story. I think that it would honestly be a collective of multiple and more to come, I believe, because I do feel as this storyteller, as this story creator, that I'm going to have so many more insightful things to share to people. I think the older I get, um, and the stories I have written now, as far as just how I grew up and what I'm seeing and what I'm aware of around me and what I think should change. Now it's me thinking, well, how can I change them, or how could I be that person to provoke change? That goes into the next story, though.
Excellent. Well, that was so you almost mic drop. So we're gonna be at the part of my show called Shot for Shot. You get to ask me any random question. I get to ask you any random question. You want to go first? I'll go first.
Okay, I'll go first.
Oh, awesome.
Okay. How old are you?
40. So
Really?
No, I'm 38. I'm just gonna claim 40. I'm 38. 2 more years, then I'm washed, and then I'm 40. So I laughed a little bit when you're like, I got all these stories, but I'm now 50 or 40. I'm like, I'm almost 40. I'm almost there.
That's funny. Okay, your turn.
That's it? That was the random question, just how old I am?
I thought we're bouncing back and forth. No?
Okay, I thought you was gonna hit me with like a meta question. Hit me
No.
with I thought it was going like a deeper question, and rather than just shot for shot, like
we start small.
Okay, here, and then we'll do two then. All right. So you had an experience on the East Coast and West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
I love asking these people, is there a different vibe, and what are the differences between your experience in the DMV area and LA?
And
I know you was only a freshman, but still, you probably still could absorb and
see. Yeah. Such a difference, such a total difference. East Coast people, I loved the East Coast. Let me just say, at some point in my life, I would love to move back to the East Coast. The culture, the energy there, I fell in love with, especially living in Washington, D.C. I definitely noticed, like when I was going to my school, when I was going to Catholic, I was the only mixed student on campus, actually. Like out of like everybody. There was nobody else. And then there was this less than 3 to 5% of African American students, and then everybody else was white. Obviously, we know DC is, they reference Washington DC as Chocolate City because there are a lot of Black people there. But the school I went to, alone, I was the only mixed person there. Now, going out during, the weekends or whatever, let's say, if I was going to Georgetown partying, if I was at UMD, if I was at Howard, it was sort of the same thing. I realized a lot of people, for some reason, when I went to school out there, could recognize that I not only wasn't from there, they just I don't know, a lot of people somehow immediately picked up I was already like a West Coast girl. But it was very, it was almost like I was the culture shock for some reason that walked into the room. And I actually realized that, and I think this is true, but there's a lot more mixed culture, mixed, less restrained individuals who are on the West Coast, especially LA. You're seeing all different types of people, all different types of ethnicities from everywhere, and that's a normal thing for LA. You go somewhere like the East Coast or of course even like Midwest, anywhere else in the country basically, you don't actually have that
Melting pot.
yeah, you don't have as much of that melting pot. Exactly. And I did sort of pick up on that in DC. It wasn't really as much of that melting pot. It was very just
Interesting.
this way or that way. Wasn't too much in between like Cali is. So
That's a good
that
option.
was definitely something I took note of. It wasn't as much of a melting pot.
I bet New York is probably a little different, but I could see that in the DMV or DC. So
Yeah.
very valid, but
Yeah.
interesting point. All right, what's your second your the full question rather than just if I'm 40 and washed, 38 or 38 and washed? What's your question for me?
Um you said you created this podcast for
Yes.
enjoyment. What is this enjoyment that you seek out of bringing other guests onto your show and having them express their stories and experiences with you?
Excellent. Well, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, honestly, my podcast is not a moneymaker. I have not monetized it, but so for me, these podcast recordings not only are ways that I can elevate the voices of others, my friends or you as a guest can, elevate your voice by connecting with new audiences. But as you can tell, I was taking notes, and when I say I take notes, I'm learning. Like for me, honestly, this is like one large archive of interviews that maybe one day I can, listen to and learn about the different nuances of industries. Like I asked, I learned a little bit about the industries of modeling and PR. I've had other guests in different industries. So for me, this has been like just one large learning project, like not only do I get to practice public speaking myself, I wanted to become a more confident public speaker. So I use podcasting to do that. But like you said, I get to learn from people's stories. And usually that's honestly, when I was always growing up, I was always an audio listener, audio learner that I learned through I learned through listening to podcasts of other people, and their stories. So for me, this has been just a great way to tap into, humans and learn from them and learn new things that I never would have thought of, right? Like you're my first, I think, person to talk about modeling, right? So like,
Yeah.
so I get to learn now I had that, and I'm very curious. Now you're going to have me do an experiment, like go back through I have over 300 podcasts and see
Wow.
the different industries that people work in. Cause I never thought about that. Like, lawyers, I had lawyers and doctors and higher ed professionals, all these different people. So I guess, yeah, it's kind of like a career thing too. Like I'm learning about different careers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Seriously.
All right. Well, this has been great. And I think we took a lot of value out of this, and I'm definitely excited to share this with the listeners. This is the part of the show. It's called shout outs and plugs. So you get to show love, shout out anyone you want to show love to, and then plugs. These are things that you want the listeners to be aware of, things that you're working on, or ways that they can follow up or get engaged with you. So you're on shout outs and plugs.
Oh wow. Okay. Shout out to I'll just make one shout out to my mom, actually, not in a typical way at all, but I feel that we have really been inspiring each other this past year. And she's also a writer, and she's really trying to break into the entertainment business as well and writing projects. And we've been on the same page as that and supporting each other and really pushing each other. So shout out to her for just being so strong and being so driven and really teaching me these things, because I take after her. And I love her so much. Shout out to you, Mom.
And then plugs. What are the things that you're working on and ways that the listeners of this can stay, up to date with what you're doing? I'll put some of that information in the show notes.
Yeah, so currently, yeah, man, I'm still listening and working on still just the modeling, still trying to get booked and busy. Hopefully I will book a role at some point, maybe with a show, maybe with a movie. Fingers crossed, everybody. Hopefully you remember who I am. And hopefully, this production company that I'm working with, we get to sell a few shows, and I really get to move into this producer role, and this goes well that I sign a deal with somebody. I'm hoping these things move forward positively.
And then how can they listeners stay engaged with you?
To keep up with me, you can follow me on Instagram at I am Jazz, Jazz Hill, Hill. I also have a TikTok. I haven't really been posting on there though, because I hear that they are going to shut down TikTok. I'm not really sure. But if you want to check me out on TikTok, it's and all that jazz with 5 Z's. And all that jazz. Yeah.
All right, excellent. Well, this has been a great show. Thank you so much, Jazz, for being a guest on this show, and thank you for sharing your journey with us. Positive Filter listeners, if you're listening to this episode, please share it. Give this podcast review or rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. That helps elevate it. As you know, every episode is dedicated to the memory of my late father-in-law, Jeff Kirsch. So please consider contributing to the Jeff Kirsch Anti-Hunger Fund that is in the show notes, a way to honor him and his legacy. So thank you so much. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting. Keep being positive, and we're out. Thank you for listening to Positive Filter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity of Movement. Thanks for listening.